In the heart of the night, this world will burn bright. We will set it alight. In the heart of the night, in the heart of the night, this world will burn bright. We will set it alight. In the heart of the night.
Hello everyone, I'm Anthropomantic Fiend, and I do horror-related things on the internet. Today I'm going to be talking about Night Train to Terror from 1985, but first I would just like to mention that Emma from the Spooky Astronauts channel, you probably know of her, she's way bigger than I am, created a playlist of small horror tubers, people who don't have as many followers for 2020. I am on that playlist, and I've discovered a lot of other awesome channels through that playlist, so I'm going to link that below. I would like to thank her for doing the playlist. It is awesome. It has helped me, and it has helped me to discover other channels. I would also like to mention that the video that I decided to submit to the playlist is my gothic horror tag. I made that back in March, but a ton of people have done it since then, even up to now, and anybody can do that. It is a completely open tag, and if you would like to, please do so. It makes me really happy when people do my tag, so I'd just like to thank everybody who has done it, and I will be linking a playlist of all of the entries to the Gothic Horror tag below, so you can check out all of those channels. Now, with that out of the way, Night Train to Terror came out in 1985, as I believe I said. This movie is completely insane. The last two movies on this disc from the box set that I'm reviewing were pretty bad, boring made-for-TV movies. So I kind of expected this to be a made-for-TV movie. It's not, and I kind of figured that out partway through it, because this movie is way too explicit to be a made-for-TV movie. It just kind of has the production values of a made-for-TV movie. It's a little bit better, but it still kind of feels like a made-for-TV movie because it's low budget and very cheesy. Basically, the setup for this movie is that there is a train that is going somewhere. We don't know where quite yet, but in the front of the train we see God and Satan having a conversation. The actor playing Satan is credited as Lucifer, and it says God as himself. I don't think they got God and Satan to be in this movie, so okay, just don't tell me who the actors are. All the passengers seem to be members of this weird 80s pop band who only know one song and play it for basically the whole movie. I don't know why it's in the movie, but I love it. This is the framing device for an anthology featuring 3 stories. God and Satan introduce each story and basically give their thoughts on morals of the story and whose soul belongs to who in the end. This is kind of a spoiler, but I don't really care, and I don't think you will either. The train is a train to the afterlife. That's not relevant to anything in the movie. That's just where the train's going. It is set to crash, and God and Satan are there because they want to decide where all the souls of the band member goes, and they are just playing this same 80s pop song for the whole train ride. This review is gonna be a bit different than some of my other ones because it's an anthology. I'm gonna leave basically all of the plot points of the anthology segments for the spoiler section and just give you a brief rundown of everything else before I go really in depth with it. All the acting in this movie, really cheesy and over the top. There are some exceptions that are actually decent, but basically everything about this movie is very cheesy, and that is what sells it for me. The music is pretty good, actually. It has this sort of intense symphonic bombasticness to it that is really good and feels almost like a classical piece in places. I think it actually plays part of a classical piece that I've heard before at the end of the last anthology segment, but nothing really stood out to me about the score, but it was good, and I thought it suited the movie well. And in contrast to that, we've got the 80s pop band that keeps popping up in between anthology segments to play the same song again. I have kind of a soft spot for 80s pop and synthesizers, so I had a good time with that, even though they only knew one song and kept playing it. There's a random breakdancing segment that I have no idea why it's in there, but I don't know why you're in this movie, band, but I'm glad that you are, because you made it that much more entertaining. Visuals, camera, cinematography, costumes, sets, nothing really highbrow there either, but they're all good. The effects in this movie, again, cheesy, but really enjoyable, and they surprised me quite a bit because there are some decent gore effects and makeup effects in this movie that I liked. But there's also quite a bit of stop-motion animation that I did not expect, and the models all look great, and the animation is superb. Stop-motion animation is another one of my favorite things in the world, inside and outside of horror and sci-fi, so that was a pleasant surprise. The framing device is weird and kind of unnecessary, but entertaining. That's kind of the whole movie, though. This movie's just kind of literally and figuratively a train wreck, but a very enjoyable one. The anthology segments all center around a different person that God and Satan are judging. The first of these is Harry something or other. I forget his last name. He is a very reckless driver, and he and his wife end up crashing and winding up in this hospital. The doctor there is completely crazy and drugs Harry to do his will, and they just start killing a bunch of people and selling their body parts to medical schools. I wouldn't have known this were it not for the narration at the very end of the segment, because this segment is just really disjointed and makes no sense at all. It's gory, but nothing else about it is particularly good. The plot is barely followable. There's barely even a plot. It's just kind of a disjointed series of kill scenes, and there's a very sort of sexual overtone to a lot of it that I did not like. The second story is the case of Greta Connors. A girl gets sucked into this love triangle that gets her and her boyfriend sucked into this really weird death cult. This one has some sort of sleazy elements to it at the beginning that I didn't care for, but the rest of it is just this weird death cult. Again, the plot is kind of barely there. I wouldn't have known what was happening were it not for the narration, but these weird death cult set pieces are bizarre and hilarious in a weird way. I had fun watching it, but the story kind of isn't there. It's just these weird death cult set pieces that kind of go nowhere. And the third segment is the case of Claire Hansen. This one is basically Nazis and Satan. I thought this had the best, most thought out story of any of the segments. It was fantastical. It went into these realms of dark fantasy and the occult that the other segments did not go into, and had some of the best effects, and was probably the most effects heavy segment in terms of like the stop motion and the monster makeup and whatnot. So I really liked this segment for the dark fantasy demonic aspect, but I didn't like the Nazi part of it. I see what they were going for. There was a shock value thing there, but it was kind of problematic and unnecessary, and they could have taken it out. The sort of uncomfortable sexual overtones of the first segment kind of didn't need to be there either. The third segment is actually pretty solid, especially compared to the other two. There's, again, a dark fantasy element that's really cool, and some solid storytelling. All in all, this movie is just completely insane. I have no idea what they were going for when they made this movie, because at one point it's an 80s music video, then God and Satan are having a moral conversation, and then I'm just seeing a bunch of random women getting killed in a doctor's office, and then there's stop motion, and I don't even know. This movie is insane. It is a literal and figurative train wreck of a movie, but I love it. It has some kind of problematic elements that are in there for shock value, but that is the case with a lot of 80s movies, so I kind of took it with that grain of salt, I suppose. I definitely recommend this movie, especially if you're a fan of very cheesy 80s cult horror films. That is my spoiler-free review of Night Train to Terror. Here are the spoilers. So starting with the story of Harry, what's his name, at the beginning, he gets drugged to do the will of this doctor. The whole rest of this segment is these mostly women getting killed in various states of undress without really any kind of context, and there's implications of rape that I kind of hated and didn't think the segment needed. It's kind of just gross, but where it really kind of falters is just being completely disjointed and not making any sense. Only when they actually tell me what's happening did I grasp what was happening, because one moment this guy's in a car crash, then someone's hypnotizing him, and then it's just a bunch of random kill scenes. The segment ends with Harry's girlfriend coming in and capturing and drugging the doctor and performing a lobotomy on him, which I thought was cool, but then after being lobotomized, he's just kind of unhinged and manages to capture her and perform surgery on her, and then Harry just runs in and captures this sort of henchman who's been doing all the really gross stuff to these women and just decapitates him. His scream in that scene is too funny to me, and the decapitation effect is cheesy as well. The whole thing doesn't make a lot of sense. There were some intense, disturbing concepts that I thought could have worked, but there wasn't really a story to go with them, so it just felt like a lot of shock value for no reason. Again, some parts of it worked, but the whole kind of sexual aspect of it was very nope. Probably the worst part of the movie, but it had its moments. The second segment, the Greta Connors case, was a little bit better, but it's pretty weird. The love triangle happens because this guy who just kind of randomly meets Greta at a carnival and is like, hey, date me, and she's like, why not? She wants to be famous and be a movie star, so he starts making movies of a very adult nature starring her and showing them to his college friends, and that's how this other guy discovers her. The narration, it literally says, as soon as this guy saw Greta in one of this guy's adult movies, it was love at first sight, and it's just like, I don't even know anymore. To get revenge, suddenly they're all in a death cult together, and I don't know why. The first thing that the death cult does is this ritual where they pull out like some very rare beetle that will kill you if you so much as move. They release it from the jar and all just sit around the table and wait to see if it's gonna do anything to anybody, and it climbs on this guy's arm. This is one of the stop motion segments. The stop motion beetle is really well done. This scene is actually really tense because the things crawling on people is kind of unnerving, and the idea that if you move, the thing's gonna kill you was really creepy, even though the beetle is clearly not real. They all survive, and then the beetle just, they let it fly out the window. This rare beetle from who knows where just flies out there and stings some girl of this couple that are making out outside, stings this girl in the face, and her head explodes and splatters blood all over this guy. It's another just random head exploding moment, and I don't even know, but it was entertaining. Their next little game that they play is they all wire each other up to these electric chairs. They create this machine that'll like randomly electrocute one of the chairs. It's basically a Russian roulette game because one of the chairs is also empty. None of our sort of people that we've been following get electrocuted, but this one guy who happens to be African American, that seems racist, but okay. Yeah, he gets electrocuted. Since he's part of this death cult, he doesn't really seem to mind. He literally says, "Excuse me while I smoke," as he starts to fry. It's this really long drawn out effect with like a prosthetic version of his face that has been contorted grotesquely, just flailing around in this chair, and everybody in the room is laughing maniacally. And this goes on for like a minute before he like actually gets completely burnt to a crisp, and it's nuts, and it was rather entertaining. Then there's a scene where they try to escape, and then there's a random little bit of martial arts that happens for about less than a minute, and then we have another little death cult set piece where there's this wrecking ball that's set to smash one of their heads, and they all sit in this circle. It crushes somebody who's not one of them, and then basically the narrators say, and they escaped and lived happily ever after. It just kind of ends. Nothing really happens, but it was more coherent than the first segment, but not really. It was only really coherent because of the narration that told us how we got from point A to point B. The third segment is the Claire Hansen segment, and in this we have a man who happens to be a Nazi who participated in the Holocaust, who has made a pact with Satan and is still alive and as young as he was then in the 1980s. Claire Hansen finds out that she has been chosen by God to cut out his heart and destroy the evil. There's also this old man who was a Holocaust survivor who recognizes him and kind of gets killed off instantly, which I didn't like. I think they threw him away. There's a detective who, because of this guy, is investigating all of these strange religious-oriented murderers that have been happening, and Claire, who just kind of has these weird dreams and finds herself in the middle of all of this. I think the best part of this segment is that she's married to this Nobel Prize-winning writer who has just written a book called God is Dead, who's basically saying religion is dead, all things can be explained. That kind of ties him to the Satan-y cult who are trying to recruit him because they're like, we think God is dead too, join Satan. And he's just like, yeah, no, I don't believe in anything, I'm my own master, and they don't take too kindly to that. A bunch of people die via stop-motion demons in this segment, which was really cool, including him. We actually get a whole stop-motion sequence of him getting stuck on a cross that is in the middle of this void and burning. There was definitely some sort of interesting religious angle that segment took that I liked, but the Nazi element didn't work for me at all, especially because of the ending of this, where Claire Hansen works in a hospital, so she actually manages to get this guy on an operating table somehow and take out his heart, or so she thinks. It actually turns out that it's her assistant who is on the operating table, and in the assistant's guise is the Satanist guy. He actually ends up winning in the end, but the whole Nazi thing just kind of threw me off. I didn't like it. It was just a plot device to say, oh, this guy's been kept young all these years. They could have taken out this exploitative reference to a terrible atrocity that was committed against an entire race of people and just had it be about religion instead, and it would have worked a lot better, but they sort of took this shock value route to get your attention, and I understand why they did it, but I don't like it. Still, I think the dark fantasy aspect of this segment was really good, and the effects were phenomenal. All in all, once again, this movie is completely insane, but I love it for that reason. It's pretty disjointed, and the plot doesn't make sense a lot of the time, and it over-relies on shock value a lot in the first and third segments in ways that I don't think it needed to, but this movie is never boring. I think if you're a fan of low-budget, cheesy 80s cult films, you will really like Night Train to Terror. That is my review. Thank you for watching my video, and hopefully I will see you in another one. Bye!